You said something a while ago that kind of caught my attention. I wondered if there was something more there, that you choose not to be friends with your kids' friends' parents. So, do you just have, like, why do you have that rule? You just don't believe that best friends of your kids should interact, like, should be close with the other family, the parents?
It's one of those things, like, mostly, Reena, being a psychologist is probably not very good for parenting, right? Like, mostly, it's probably better not to have a parent who's a psychologist.
I don't know
But
about that.
occasionally, I think so. But occasionally there are things where I'm like, oh, I have seen how this goes down, or I have seen how this can go
Mm.
wrong.
Ah.
And with that foresight, often, drawn out of my own clinical practice or whatever, I've been able to make certain choices. So, like, for example, we never let our kids take technology in their rooms,
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
get-go. I only knew that because of my work. Like, a lot of families,
Mm.
only discover that in retrospect. And so this was one where I had seen it happen enough that the parents become friends with the kids' parent, the parents of their own kids' friends.
Mhm.
And then the kids have a falling out or have a
Mhm.
problem, and then it gets really awkward. So I was like, I'm just staying clear of that.
That makes total sense when you explain it. And interesting, we got a letter kind of alluding to this some similar problem. So I want to address this and get your take on it. It says, I have a question that has not been addressed and is something that I struggle with. How do you navigate being friends with the parents at your kid's school when your kids are also in the same grade? And what do you do when the kids of these parents do things that are not nice, or they slight or exclude your kid from activities? How do you separate the two, or can you? How do you not let the kids' stuff start interfering with the parents' relationships? Wow. Okay. First off, when I was growing up, the school, the public school in Tampa, Florida, was just so big that I felt like my parents had a separate, my parents are from India, like a totally separate social circle. So this was never an issue in the 80s and 90s.
True. My parents, I don't even think they knew the parents of the kids I hung out with. I mean, they sort of had a vague recognition, may have like nodded to them in the grocery store. But I feel like this is something that's very generational. Like, I think
Mm.
that we're now into a generation where this is much more common.
Hmm.
Um, I will also say, just in defense of becoming friends with the parents of your kids' friends, this especially is easy to do when your kids are young, because I don't know if this is your experience, Reena, but I found a lot of raising little kids to be fairly boring.
Yes,
Like,
this is
you're just
true. And nobody says
bored.
this publicly. So I'm
I'll
glad
say
you did.
it. And so I actually, in truth, I did have people where we would hang out together because you have a 3 or a 4-year-old, or a 2-year-old, and you become friends with them because you can then have a human being to speak to
Right.
in the long hours
Yes.
of hanging out with 2, 3, 4, or 5-year-olds. And so this is one of those things where I don't want people to feel like I think it's bizarre or somehow inexplicable that you could end up being quite close with somebody because of your kids. They go to school together or preschool
Yeah.
together. Like, it's very easy to fall into this. But then comes the fact that the kids start to have their own opinions about this, or
Hmm.
kids don't always get along over time, or so natural to development, Reena, by 5th or 6th grade, kids really change who they're friends with
Yeah.
often, that they just do.
Yeah. And I even find younger in elementary, they have very strong opinions of the kids they like and don't like, the kids they want to spend time with, the kids they don't want to, which I think is healthy and good. Like, they know what they like. But you're right. When they're younger, I think that you're automatically friends with people who have kids the same age, because let's face it, you can't always take kids at that age everywhere. And when you have parents who have kids the same age, they kind of understand and get it.
Absolutely. And I think about, like, the long hours I spent with dear friends, where you're just keeping your 2 and 3-year-olds safe while you guys just enjoy
Oh my
one cup of
God.
coffee after another, right? And, like,
Yes,
that's for me how I could enjoy parenting 2
that's
and
right.
3-year-olds the most. Like, whether, true confessions, that's what it was about. Okay, so now into this letter. Okay, so this stinks, right? These are the letter writer's friends whose kids are excluding her kid. And the letter writer doesn't know what to do with this information or how to respond appropriately.
Hmm.
Okay. So where do you want to start with this?
Well, I'm just curious. Explain to me, I get it, like the parents are friends, but how does this really manifest in real life, particularly the adolescent years, girls versus boys? Like, where do you, in your clinical practice, where have you seen this like the trickiest to navigate?
Yeah. Okay, well, so here's what it looks like in real life. This is where social media just does not help us once again. So what it looks like is, okay, so say I'm going to just make this up, a friend group of 4 moms, right? And say they each have a daughter, and say those 4 daughters have enjoyed one another's company 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Let's just sort of say it like that's a very, plausible, scenario. And then let's say that come 6th grade, 3 of those girls are getting together for sleepovers or whatever. And they're making TikToks and they're posting stuff and they're hanging out where the 4th child, through the magic of social media, can see it all and see that, the 4 has become a 3 and she is the left out kid. So like this is the kind of scenario you hear about all the time. And so that's how it would happen. And, obviously this could happen so easily and it's very easy to picture this happening. So now the kid and the letter writer, let's say in this scenario, are very well aware of who's not at that party.
And
That's
they're
how it
totally
happens.
left out, and it feels like absolute crap because now they see everyone's hanging out and they're not included. But
Well,
how do you?
actually, let me stop you there, Reena.
Okay,
Feels like crap for who? Like that's
for your
the first.
kid, right? And you
Well,
feel
the letter
right,
writer doesn't say that. So we have to ask that question.
huh?
So the letter writer, the kid may come and be like, check it out, mom. Girls 1, 2, and 3 are all making TikToks over at girl 2's house without me. And shows the parent. But I think the first question we have to ask is, how does the kid feel about this? Because in the letter, that didn't come up. And so I think as much as the parent might be like, oh, this is awful. Like, how could you not be included? And how could the parent who's hosting not have invited you?
Yeah.
I think the first question we have to ask is, to the kid who's not included, how do you feel about the fact that that's happening? Or
Wow.
are you okay with not being included?
Oh my gosh, I have such a visceral reaction, maybe because we've all had that feeling of being left out. We know what that feels like, especially in those years. But you're saying, don't just assume, like maybe they're okay with it.
They might be, right? They might be. And I'm like, you just don't know. And I think the thing that is so true about, let's assume it's like that kind of 5th, 6th, 7th grade swamp of social activity, right? Like dark swamp of social activity. There are so many variables, so many dynamics, so many currents running through that are totally opaque to adults. Like we have to really honor that there's a lot we don't get and there's a lot we don't understand. But we do need to leave open the possibility that the kid 4 in this scenario, as I'm calling her, might be like, I'm really glad not to be there. Like
Wow.
they get up to stuff I don't want to be part of, or we've started to go our separate ways at school. It's totally cool. I don't mind that I'm not there. Like we need to create room for that possibility, because then it still leaves the question of what is the parent going to do with their own feelings about that. But you've taken the kid out of it because the kid's like, it's okay, or it's a relief, or it bugs me, but not that much, right? I mean, we want to make room for all of those possibilities.
I never thought that would be an option. So how do you think for the parent who has their child excluded, you're saying, okay, don't just assume that this is a horrible thing. Maybe it's a way for them to peel away from the group or something. But let's say it's not. Let's say they really feel hurt and excluded. Like, so what do you do then?
Okay. So actually, let's go back and play it out if the kid's okay, because the parent may still feel like they've got a problem. So if the kid's like, yeah, whatever, I don't need to be there, then the parent's like, okay, what should I do with this? If my kid's okay with it, do I need to be okay with it, right? Should at least my kid have been invited, right? Like that's a question that might be worth asking. And I think a parent could feel like, it would be okay, but it's sort of weird that you weren't even asked. Like I could see that could be something that sort of lingers and bothers. But what I would say, Reena, is if the kid is okay with it, and this is a great universal rule in all of kids' social lives, if the kid's okay with it, the parent probably has to be okay with it too,
Yes.
right? Like we
Yes.
really need to follow their lead. We don't understand all the dynamics. It really should be the most important thing is how the kid feels. And then the parent has to decide, how much do I care about these adult friendships? Does my connection to this group of parents hinge on my kid's inclusion, or do I like them separately enough? Can I just leave this entirely to the side? I think that that's something then the adult needs to work out on their own time. But if the kid's okay with it, I don't know that it's worth making a thing of it with the other parents.
Yeah.
So, but that's only if the kid's okay with it.
You tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I would assume more than not, when your kid finds out they were excluded from something that everyone else went to, they probably don't feel good about it. Even though you're saying to us, don't assume that this is a bad thing necessarily. Talk to them, ask them how they feel. But what do you do if your child really does feel bad that they're excluded and you're friends with the parents?
Yeah, right. Okay, so let's assume, and I agree with you, more likely they're going to be like, whoa, ouch,
Yeah.
And especially if they're showing it to the parent, there's probably a reason that they're showing it to the parent. And so then I think step number one is coach your kid at home. Like talk about it at home, keep it in the house, right? So I think the parent might say, wow, like that's kind of weird. Yeah, I can see why you're upset. Like, what's going on? Like,
Yeah.
what do you make of that, right?
Yeah.
Really see if you can't be curious with your kid about how they understand why they weren't invited. Also, and this is, I think, one of the hardest things to do in all of parenting, be open to the possibility that your kid may have done something that is tricky for those other kids, maybe wasn't nice or, talked badly about them to other people. And so the kids were like, we're not inviting you. You're trashing us all over the 6th grade,
Mhm.
So gently say, like, what do you think happened here? Looking back on, your interactions with them, is there anything you think that, you might have done on, purposely or not that could account for this? So I think, have that conversation, which of course, Reena, like any parent in this scenario is probably like spraining a muscle not to pick up the phone and call that other parent.
Right. Exactly right. Totally.
Like,
Totally right.
right. These are my friends. Why aren't you there? Right. So
Completely.
we're asking, right, a lot, which is just to say, like, slow your roll, try to talk it through with your kids, see what your kid can do with it. And then if your kid's like, I have no idea why I'm not included, like, this feels super weird, I don't get it, I think then the next question is to say to your kid, do you want to try to talk with those girls about why you're not there? Like, do you want to raise it in a really respectful but also assertive way to see if you can get to the bottom of it?
But I feel like kids would never do that at that age. They're so scared. They it's a lot of pressure. It's hard for adults to even do that, right?
Well,
Do you see kids really doing that?
Well, okay, that is the magic question, right? Okay, so let's say the kid's like, right? Like, I mean, like, let's be honest. Like, of course I'm not going to say anything. It's just going to be weird if I say something. But I think it's still worth it for the parent to say, okay, but let me just spitball what you might say. Like, let me lay out some language for you just to, like, think about a little bit. So the parent might say, what if you did say, and maybe not to all 3 of them at once, maybe you go find, the kid that you trust the most or are the closest with and say, look, hey, you guys are posting stuff on TikTok and, obviously, you're free to get together without me. Like, obviously you're not obliged to invite me, but is there anything I should know? Have I done something or said something or somehow hurt you in a way that made you feel like you didn't want me there, right? And sometimes, like, a kid might be like, no. And then they hear the language and they're like, oh, that's not completely off the wall. Or I could try that. Or I could try my, 6th grade version of that. But it's worth it, even if the kid's like, I will never do that, right? And most kids are going to be like, I will never do that. Reena, there's still value in the parent playing that all the way out for the kid to hear how a person might respectfully assert themselves in that interaction.
So where have you seen this, like, in real life work? Like, what do kids say at that age that could get them to kind of confront them, but also have the courage to do it? Like, is there a saying, is there a slogan? Like, how do they get into this? Because I just don't see my kids ever doing something like that. being able to
Right.
do that, right, at that age.
Exactly. And like the language I used sounds like the 52-year-old woman that I am. Right? I mean, it's not like sixth grade language. You know, and I think that when we give kids scripts, I always say to them, like, here's how I would say it as a middle-aged lady, like, you will figure out your version of this. And here's what I will say, Reena, in terms of like how this really ever plays out in real life. I think about this a little bit like football. Okay, so here's my weird metaphor for this. So you know how in football, like, you don't get a touchdown on every play. You just gain yards. And the scoreboard does not change at all. But that doesn't mean you haven't made some progress. And, you know, you may lose possession and then regain possession and then get some more yards. So for me, every one of those conversations with a kid, when you're like, well, you could say this, or what if you tried that? And the kid's like, yeah, no, never going to happen, right? Like, to me, you may actually be gaining yards, but the scoreboard hasn't changed. You may need to have that conversation literally 10 times over 3 years. And then suddenly 3 years later, the kid says to the other kids, you guys, like, how come I wasn't invited? Like, you don't have to invite me, but like, how come? Okay, touchdown.
Wow. Okay.
And you were gaining yards all those years you were gaining yards. And I think that that's the part where in so much of parenting, we can't despair if we're like, I coached the kid and then they went back on the field and nothing happened, right?
That's right.
We have to be like, I coached the kid, they went back on the field, they gained 2 yards, they lost possession.
Oh, wow.
That's how we have to think about it.
That is really good. Like, even though they might not be, you know, dancing in the end zone with a touchdown, that gaining those yards by making these small steps can actually add up to a significant moment down the road.
Like they're thinking about it.
Right. So maybe could it be as simple as them just saying, so you guys all hung out, and just as a way to be like, I saw you, like, I know you guys were all there, and maybe that's just the opening.
Maybe that's the opening. And maybe the kid is sort of saying, like, you guys can hang out, but like, you don't have to stick my face in it, right? I mean, like, there's other also things in here that could be done more graciously than the scenario I imagined. But again, it's like getting into that idea of like, we work through the kid, we think with the kid, we coach the kid, we're patient with the kid. We don't assume that our upset and their upset are the same level of upset. We work really with their experience of it. Okay, but we got to think this all the way through, though, Reena. So say that the kid's like, I will take it under advisement. I hear your coaching.
Yeah.
I'm going to think about it. I think then, you know, of course, a parent in this scenario would be tempted to pick up the phone.
Right.
And call the other parents, especially, say, the host who knew who was coming.
That was my next question to you is, you know, if you're a parent, at what point, because obviously you're going to feel bad that your kid was left out. At what point do you take action and contact the other parent who is your friend?
This is tough, right? So one question I would have is, where does your kid stand on that? Which,
let's say the kid has felt left out, like it's really hurting the kid and they're upset. So how do you have that conversation with your friend?
Right. Well, but what I think you might want to ask your kid is, do you want me to talk to, you know, number two's mom? Right? Like, do you know, the party was over at number two's house. Like, do you want me to reach out to number two's mom and see what the story is?
And what if it's a no? Don't.
Yeah. And some kids might be like, are you kidding me? Like that, I will never be able to show my face in the sixth grade again. Right. That's something to take very seriously. Right.
But it's affecting your friendship. It's affecting your friendship with this person, this other adult.
It is.
So like you want to clear the air for yourself, but if the kid is telling you don't, what do you do then?
That's so hard, right? I mean, I would say that's probably the hardest version of all of this is if your kid's like, I'm in pain and I do not want you to say anything. I think the parent has to think really long and hard about what they should do. The thing I would bring into this is, at some level, the adults have a lot more freedom about who they hang out with than the kids do. Like, the kids all have to go to school together. They are going to be lab partners. They are going to be, you know, group project partners. And if your kid is like, to make sixth grade possible, it makes a huge difference to me if you don't call so-and-so's mom, I think we take that pretty seriously, because it's not like we are like required to hang out with so-and-so's mom, right? And going to be assigned to a group project with so-and-so's mom. We don't really have to repair it. We might want to. but we have other friends and other options for friends. And so one thing is just to be, I mean, I'm not saying this is a great resolution. It's really not a resolution. But I think that's something we want to think through. But what if the kid's like, I don't care. Call her, I don't care. Whatever, right? I mean, that's, I think, another really interesting thing. What
Because
would you, okay, so say, yeah, what do you
I'm
think?
just trying to think of like what's the most realistic scenario. And I think if I were that kid, I would not want you to reach out to the other parent. I know you're friends with the other parent. Don't bring it up. But it's complicating like maybe I'm out playing tennis, or we're both in a gardening club together, or, you know, we work together. You know, there are so many situations where you're gonna cross paths and it's gnawing at me. And I'm one of these people, when something bothers me, I have to deal with it. I can't just put it aside. I've got to deal with it. So how can I do this in a way that doesn't screw everything up?
Yeah. Okay, so let's say maybe you're not going to ask the kid for permission, right? Maybe you really need to sort this out. And you described scenarios where that could happen, like it's the neighbor, or you guys play tennis together, or, you know, it happens all the time, Reena, where it's siblings whose kids are friends and then not friends, right? Like it's like
Good point.
your own sister, right? And then suddenly things are getting weird. And like, you got to talk to your sister. Like you got to try to sort it out. So then I think what we would want to do is to give it every possibility of going well, right? Is I think how we want to approach it. So what I wonder if this parent does call another parent about this scenario, you know, make it as likely as possible that the other parent will handle it well. And to do that, I think it would involve saying something like, hi, this is a little awkward and I hope you don't mind me reaching out about it. But we were home on, you know, Saturday night and I saw that you had the other two girls over and it felt really weird for my kid. And I just wanted to check in to see if there's something we should know, if there's something I should know. Like, I just wanted to get your take on it, right? Like, assume you don't have all the information because you probably don't have all of the information. Because that parent could very well say back, your kid has been talking bad about my daughter. Like, you have no idea what you don't know.
That's a great point.
And so when go gentle into this.
Go gentle. You always give us great phrasing. And like, what is something roughly I could say to that friend of mine where my child is now excluded that won't put her on the defensive? It might open the door to help you understand a little bit more about the situation that you might not know.
Well, actually, I think you've got it right there, which is to say, you could say, now, I understand I am working only with my kid's take on this, and I understand that my kid's take is incomplete. But here's what happened the other night, right? And I just wanted to run it by you because I really value our friendship. I really love your daughter, right? And I just want to, like, you know, see if there's more I should know. I just want to think it through with you. But, you know, again, like sort of appealing to this idea of, we have only a sliver of information. We don't really know the whole story. When we appeal to people as wanting to understand this with us and being good-hearted, we tend to bring that out in them. I think that that's really the way to go at it, because here's the thing. You cannot determine outcomes here. You can't make those kids take your kid back. Like, you just cannot do it. What you can determine is the process by which this gets resolved, right? Like, and it can be a good process or a bad process. And so, like, even if the other parent says, okay, here's the deal, actually, your kid was trashing my kid and those other two girls, and they didn't want to invite her, and I didn't feel like I could make them. You can be like, okay, I am really glad you let me know. And I appreciate you being honest with me. I mean, like, you could do all sorts of things that would leave open the possibility of maintaining that friendship, would leave open the possibility of doing good coaching with your kid. But if you go in guns blazing, assuming you know the whole story, you're probably going to shut a good process down.
Ooh, that's good to keep in mind, because I would be the one going in guns blazing, because nobody likes their kids hurt, right? Or feeling left out.
That's it. Nobody. Exactly, right? Like, that is the thing. That is the thing that, like, as a parent, we are not designed to be impassive if our kid is being hurt, right? We are designed to become protective. That mama bear instinct, of course, is going to come to the fore. And what we have to remember is, everybody's got that instinct, or should have that instinct. So if you go attacking somebody else's kid, you know what you're going to get? Their mama bear instinct.
That's so
So
true.
you got to be really
That's so
careful about how you
true.
go about this.
Lisa, before we wrap it up, I'm just curious. There are so many scenarios where, it could be your kids are friends with their cousins, and suddenly they have a falling out, or there's reasons why your families are like really closely intertwined. What are things, if you are friends with your kids' friends' parents, what are some sort of basic ground rules that you think you should keep in mind that will help when this type of situation happens? Because it's very often, kids go through so many things in adolescence that there could be this moment of tension.
Absolutely. It's a great question, right? And when it works, it's wonderful, right? I mean,
Yes.
there are families who go on vacation with their dear friends and the kids
Right.
all have a blast and it's fantastic. So there's a lot of reasons why, we might as adults lean into this. I really think you just want to go in eyes wide open. Like, you just don't want to be naive and assume that kids aren't going to end up, either growing in different directions or having an issue with each other that is very real and understandable. And so I think, yeah, absolutely. If it works for you to be friends with your kids' friends' parents, that's fine. But, you know, be open to the possibility that the vacation you schedule 6 months from now may not work as well 6 months from now as it would today. And schedule vacations if you're going to do it knowing that and planning for that possibility.
Mm. Well, I never thought about this. And as you enter adolescence and things change and kids have opinions, why do they have opinions? Why do they grow up and have opinions, Lisa?
I know. It's so much easier when they're little sometimes.
Give them a snack and work towards a special treat and they're fine. Those days are over for some of us.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Lisa. What do you have for us for Parenting to Go?
For Parenting to Go, I want to underscore something from this episode, which is we don't know very much about the complexities of kids' social lives, even when we think we do. And when I picture like a 7th grade lunchroom, for me, the activity in that lunchroom is happening in like 50 dimensions. And our kid comes home and tells us 1 or 2 dimensions. And anytime we want to guide them or weigh in or maybe make a phone call, we want to remember we are 48 dimensions short of understanding what was really going on in that situation. And so our goal largely will be to ask questions, seek guidance, be open-minded. We very rarely have the whole story, and we never want to forget that.
Hard to keep in mind when your emotions are full ahead and hard to ignore sometimes.
Absolutely. And when your kid's hurt, absolutely.
That's exactly right. Well, I'll see you next week, Lisa.
I'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the Ask Lisa podcast so you get the episodes just as soon as they drop. And send us your questions to asklisa@drlisadamore.com. And now a word from our lawyers. The advice provided on this podcast does not constitute or serve as a substitute for professional psychological treatment, therapy, or other types of professional advice or intervention. If you have concerns about your child's well-being, consult a physician or mental health professional. If you're looking for additional resources, check out Lisa's website at drlisadamore.com. We'll see you next week.